Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar titled Deliver Value Faster Through Integrated Automated Testing for Your Salesforce Apps. I am Supriya Gunkar, and I'll be your moderator today. This session is going to be an hour long, and we do intend to take some questions at the end. So if you have any questions, post it in the comment section, and our team will pick up your questions accordingly. This session is hosted by Conformiq and Qentinel. And let me now introduce you to the fine gentlemen, the presenters of the session, Mark Kremer, CEO and President of Conformiq, and Nikhil Sharma, Product Manager with Qentinel. They come with vast experience in their own respective fields. Their credentials, coordinates are right in front of you. So if you have any questions, you want to connect with them, please feel free to do so. I will now request Mark Kremer to take you through the agenda, the points that he would be discussing in the session today, along with Nick.
And thank you all for joining today. The agenda we have outlined is to talk about a little bit about the background in terms of how Conformiq and Qentinel got together. I think that's important for how the combination can provide significant value, particularly in the Salesforce testing space. And then based on our experience in using these tools and solutions to address Salesforce testing, I think it'd be appropriate to talk about how what the challenges are in that space, and why does it make sense to have an optimized solution approach to address these challenges. And we'll talk about what that approach is in our third item, and what the Conformiq and Qentinel tools are, and how they together can address the challenges. And finally, we'll share a couple of success stories with the audience, and talk about how our customers have actually benefited by the combined solution. So with that, we'll start a little bit with the background. And what you'll see today is Nikhil and I'll be sharing the stage, and we'll be bouncing back and forth to highlight the strengths of both companies, and communicate the strengths of both companies as we go through this. So here's a real high-level timeline of where and how our companies got started, and actually where we got together. And interestingly, for both, the technologies have started almost 20 years ago, but have evolved to having a industry leading technology solution on both sides, and where we combine them is really critical to deliver that optimized solution that we'll be talking about. The Conformiq technology is, as a result of the 20 years of deployments, is not only actually leading, and arguably the leader in the MBT technology today, but as a result of the evolution, it's reliable, scalable, and as we continue to develop, it's getting smarter and smarter as we go along. And this is what's key about Conformiq, but what got us to the point where Qentinel and Conformiq needed to work together was our solution's very focused, and it has been very focused on the test design and the linkages to test automation. By combining with an industry-leading technology execution platform like Qentinel, we together can provide much more value to our customers. So with that, I'll now let Nikhil talk about the background and the technology that Qentinel delivers.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks a lot. And thank you, Supriya, for a nice introduction. I was slightly worried when you said, you have the coordinates also on the slide. There were none, but I can tell you where I am at the moment. I'm actually in Tampere in Finland, and in one of those offices back in the days where Nokia used to have mobile phone operation was still a big thing here in Finland. So that's where I am physically. And on Qentinel, the company started in year 2002 as with an intense focus on software quality, and the idea was to improve quality of life by improving the quality of software, because more and more so our lives are so much dependent on the softwares we interact with, and then a bad quality software can actually can make or break your day. So that was back in 2002. Over a period of many years, we have done some really large-scale test automation right from scratch for big company names like Kone Cranes in Finland, and many big major Finnish players and also international players. We have offices in Germany, in Finland, a couple of offices here, then one in Chicago. And over these 2 decades of experience in building test automation for these large organizations from scratch, we realized that there is a lot. There's a myriad of things that you need to do when you start building test automation infrastructure. As in, you set up the whole CI/CD pipeline, you build test automation interfaces, you develop test environments and whatnot. And in all these projects, we were doing it over and over again. And we realized that there's a real need in the market, in the technology market, to have a SaaS product, which is a test automation software as a SaaS service. And that's where we came up with the idea, and that's how Qentinel Pace was born, which we will talk about today. And the first license of Qentinel Pace was sold in 2018. In 2019, Conformiq and Qentinel formed a strategic partnership, which Mark very beautifully explained why we did so. More on what happened in 2019, Qentinel Pace became an ISV partner of Salesforce. What that translates into is that you can find us on Salesforce App Exchange, and we are a certified partner, which means you can trust us when it comes to Salesforce test automation, and Salesforce trusts us as well. In 2020, what we did was we had a divestment. So Qentinel, as I mentioned earlier, was mostly focused on professional service business, and the product business started 2018. In 2020, we divested our professional service business, so we are now only a core product house. That's the best thing that we have at the moment, and that's what we are developing every day. And the mission and vision is to kind of revolutionize and democratize how software testing is done in the world, and with a core focus on Salesforce ecosystems. With that, I think that's quite some introduction. Let's look at the biggest challenges in Salesforce automated testing. So there are like a few mentioned here. A few of them are very specific to Salesforce, and others are generic challenges that we have experienced and the world experiences when it comes to test automation. So when you think about Salesforce as an application, it's no more a standalone CRM application that is out there. It has transformed from a standalone application to a major integration hub. Now, I think about Salesforce App Exchange itself has 3,500 apps. That's a massive, massive number of applications in that ecosystem. And not only that, if you think about a typical industry landscape, rarely Salesforce would stand alone as one application in that industry landscape. It might be interacting with other ERP systems, SAP systems, and whatnot. So what you're looking at is a complex IT landscape. And what is important for what is crucial for businesses is that their end-to-end business crucial processes are built or they travel across that IT landscape. Now, think about that whole jungle, if I may use that word, of different softwares with different release cycles. Now, if you think about Salesforce, does 3 major releases in a year, and all the other applications around it have their own release cycles. Some of them are SaaS products, other are not SaaS products. And in that continuously changing, unpredictable world, you need to ensure that your businesses end-to-end processes are running uninterruptedly. And it's I think I can't underline it more that what could happen, or what are the repercussions that can come from a broken, crucial end-to-end process. Now, that's one thing. And if you look at what Quality Report from 2019 and 2020 has published, often testing is looked at as an underestimated and an overlooked effort. And the reasoning behind it, if you look at it from a more academic point of view, is that testing inherently does not add value. There's no direct value that comes out of testing. So when you approach a business owner and you say, hey, given that I could implement a new cool feature or new end-to-end business process, or I could spend the same amount of time in testing it, you're most likely to hear, hey, we need new features, which means testing is then pushed further down in the software development cycle. And when you reach that state, when you really have to test, often people realize, or often teams realize, that either they are low on budget or low on time. 2 things which are very critical for any businesses. And third thing, which is like one of my favorite, is test environments. And 60% of IT time and resources are spent on maintaining and setting up a test automation environment. And this is something, well, Quality Report says it, and we have also learned over these 2 decades of experience in test automation. And this is like one of the biggest monster that is out there in test automation. Which we are trying to address through what Mark mentioned earlier, this kind of scalable platform, which is like a test environment as a service. Now, when you think about test environments, these are basically machines, or it could be machines in cloud, or virtual machines, or real machines executing your test cases. And when you scale your test automation across your entire organization, different team, it becomes the bottleneck in scaling up if you can't scale your test environments with the scaling. So this is all I had to say. What are your thoughts on it, Mark? You have been in this area more than I have been.
Yes, thanks, Nikhil. From the Conformiq point of view, and what I've seen with our customers that are using Conformiq in driving the test requirements for Salesforce applications, what's driving it more than anything is, as Nikhil talked about, the complexity of the total application, not just the CRM aspect of it. And because there are so many changes throughout the end-to-end application and solution, you need to be able to take into take a quality assurance point of view of the end-to-end solution. And because of the changes and the complexities, and now because of what Nikhil indicated in terms of Salesforce being a hub, what you've got is very crucial information and applications that, if they are not actually validated and confirmed that you have implemented the right functionality throughout the process, the exposure for these companies becomes greater and greater. And you look at that, if you are using this end-to-end application for running your your company and managing your company and managing not only your company's information but your customers' information, if they're not implemented properly, the exposure, for the companies, taking this approach becomes greater, and that's with the complexity and the risk, taking a more systematic approach using technology like Conformiq, which we'll touch on in a minute, is absolutely critical. And the combination of the two, where you've got efficient test execution, efficient test creation, with the ability to effectively test just what needs to be tested, to reduce the time of testing, which, as Nikhil said, is really important. You'll find that the combination of these two products to deliver a complete solution is going to be really interesting, and we'll share some of the details of that when we get to the success stories. So with that I think is an appropriate time now. We've talked about the background of the companies, why we think we're well positioned to deliver value, what the problems are, and the complexity of the solution and the testing requirement. I think it's time to give you some insight, into what does that solution look like, and how do we look at the overall integration of technologies and solution to address these challenging problems. And if you're not familiar with Conformiq, as I mentioned, Conformiq has primarily been focused on the automated test design, and we do that by capturing the requirements graphically in a model. And we have a lot of approaches to do that. And if you're interested, it's after this webinar, we can get you to where you can show you a specific demonstration of that. And those captured requirements in the model are used with an intelligent engine, if you will, to automatically create not just test cases, but the optimal set of test cases for the specific piece of the application that needs to be tested. And as you are involved in shorter and shorter sprints, that could be very specific functionality, or it could be the end-to-end functionality, depending on where you are in the process. And in doing so, those tests are optimized for what you need to test. And the way the process works, you can effectively validate what you're testing, document that you've tested it, and use that as the starting process for the automated execution, and go directly to automated execution, as you can see in this circular approach, to Qentinel pace. And you can do that in an optimized way. And that's why if you do that efficiently, you can not only create new test cases, but you can efficiently get to automated execution with the push of a button. And you can do it iteratively, which, for those people who are involved in this process, you certainly understand there's tends to be a significant effort associated with the scripting and programming the scripts for automated execution. But by having an optimized integrated solution, you can minimize, if not eliminate, script maintenance as part of this process. So Conformiq, requirements, optimized test with a connection to a efficient test execution that gives you the insight as to what needs to be tested and how you correct any errors as part of that process. So with that, why don't you highlight a little bit, Nikhil, Qentinel Pace and how it takes the test from Conformiq and manages the rest of the life cycle.
Yep, great. So what Qentinel Pace does, we have robots in Qentinel Pace, which actually takes what Mark's creator creates and then execute them in a very scalable platform. So if I were to dig it a little bit more, you have so what I was talking about earlier, the whole maintenance burden when it comes to test environments, provisioning and upkeep. So once the test cases are, as Mark mentioned, created, they are pushed into a version control. It could be any Git or your own custom Git. And then we have robots, which are basically your digital test automation experts, if you will. And you can scale them in a way that you could basically run 10,000 robots in clouds, churning massive amount of test cases at parallel, day in, day out. And this is not only tied to, since you're probably aware of the idea that Salesforce is not just a web application. Every Salesforce application is also mobile enabled by default. And if you were to also test on mobile phone, since Qentinel Pace is a platform agnostic product, you can use those same test cases, which is a core unique selling proposition of how those test scripts are, that you can take those test scripts from Conformiq and then run them on cross platforms. You can run them on web and mobile in a highly scalable way. And once that is done, and not needless to say, there is a whole CI/CD behind it. So sorry for the short terms, but like this whole continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline behind it. So you could also send, like, should you have one of your own, you could send API calls to Qentinel Pace, or you could schedule those robots. And when it comes to Salesforce testing, one of the key things there is how the application appears to different users. So an admin user or a developer or a customer success manager would have different views in the applications when they log in. Now, this can be tested in a very managed way. When you can think about it, that different robots, you can assign them different user personas, if you will, and then they can access the application with those credentials and see what they're only, or what they should be seeing, and test them. Once those test cases are done, you get a detailed report of what those robots were executing. You can also record videos of what those robots were doing. So, afterwards, you can check out those videos, and if there's a bug, you can actually scroll through the video and see where things start to fail, and point your developer to the exact video and saying, hey, this is where things start to go wrong. Because often when something fails, it's always like a step before the actual failure when things started to go south. And once that is done, you have a result warehouse of the entire runs that you have ever done since the inception of that project till the time you delete that project. And that's all stored in a very organized way in the product. And top of that, there is a whole analysis and there's a whole predictive analytics that is also inbuilt in the platform, which can look at the trends in your test case results, see how different test cases have been performing with time, and show you if there are outliers there, and gather data from different systems to make you understand how your quality of this Salesforce application or the ecosystem of Salesforce application has been behaving over a period of time. And then we go back, since we are working in agile ways, you would be developing all these different business processes. So we kind of start the loop again. You have now new processes, which means you have new requirements, and that goes on and on with the quality. So that's the Qentinel Pace and Conformiq's integrated approach to Salesforce testing. So as we were talking about earlier, like if you look in the top left corner of your screen, you have the simplified version of your IT landscape. So you have Salesforce, you have SAP, your Oracle. You probably would have like hundreds of different applications from third-party vendors. For some applications, you probably don't even have access to source code, and they are made available to you in the later later part of the development. So that's your system under test, and then you have Conformiq, which is basically taking those requirements and converting into test cases. Now these test cases could be, as I mentioned earlier, could be run on, so these test cases remain the same, and they're passed to Qentinel phase, where they can be executed on, if should there be desktop applications, which in the case of SAP and Oracle, most likely there are. So you can run these end-to-end process, and that end-to-end process could even go through different platforms. You could have something you need to verify on the web application, and then the robot needs to go to a desktop application and verify whether the transaction has been successful or not. And yeah, so the whole cross-platform testing. One thing that I would like to point out here is this kind of basewords test design. So what Conformiq is doing now is it's creating the test automation script or test cases, if you will, in basewords in this integration. And these basewords they are cross-platform or platform agnostic keywords, which means when the Conformiq has created those test cases, you can take the same test case and run against different platforms. So that's like a very cool thing, which is which I haven't seen at least in different execution products out there in test automation world. So that's the whole architecture. Do you, Mark, have something to add here?
Yeah, one point I'd like to carry on from what Nikhil mentioned is one of the unique aspects of Conformiq is the test cases that are generated are platform independent. So with a push of a button, we can specify whether it's desktop, web, mobile, API. You've got we're not based on requirements. Conformiq really abstracts the test execution environment, and because of the combination of the two products, as Nikhil mentioned, we're really uniquely positioned to be able to implement very abstractly a omni-channel testing environment, and as we talked about, because of the complexity of the applications, this is becoming more and more the norm, so that you can get to, with an optimized integrated solution, a very efficient testing process where you really haven't been able to do that in the past. So now I just want to show you really kind of at an abstract level what this might look like, from a Conformiq standpoint. And really what you're seeing on the right or the left, depending on how it's being presented, but is a model in Conformiq in terms of how you get started with the process and how the flow of the functions might move through that process, how you manage the transition based on the actual requirements and application that you need to test. And this model here is actually what drives through with the intelligent constraint solving engine, the optimized set of test cases that you would be using to actually do the testing, and fundamentally these test cases, after you describe it with this process here, you get those test cases with the push of a button. And if the requirements change, you change the model and you rerun the test case generation process, you get a new set of test cases with a push of a button. And those new test cases can be driven through the Qentinel pace framework and execute those test cases immediately. So, and it's not just the test cases, but it's those test cases that are integrated with specific data. So you can manage the test case generation in cooperation with data, which is crucial to the testing process. So this is a simplified version and one mechanism of how we output those test cases, where you can see the test steps and that you go through, for the automated generation. And probably the thing that, and this is in an Excel spreadsheet, we push a button and say, okay, well, these would, you can use this for documentation purposes, and then you can push a button and say, okay, go directly to Qentinel pace. So you have, basically the flexibility of generating any type of test case with the scripts for execution with a push of a button. And what you might want to take away from this picture here, and this is one of the other values that, based on the intelligence built into the Conformiq engine, we actually define and know the expected results. So you're not just running a test. You need to know what the expected results are to figure out whether it's a pass or fail, and that's generated automatically. The test oracle is generated automatically as part of the test case creation process. So you really get the information that you need to effectively do your test execution. And with that, we hand it off to Qentinel, which Nikhil will give you a little overview.
Yeah, so when you have created that model, and as Mark said, with the push of a button, created the test cases, and when they are imported, or when the robots have actually fetched those test cases from the Conformiq creator model, the test cases actually look like what you see on the left side of the screenshot. So when it says test cases, and below that you have name of the test case, which is entering a lead. And then if you look at the steps, they are now, that's what I was mentioning to, as passwords. So they are basically transcribed into password script. And all of these are platform agnostic test steps. And basically how they interact with the application is when you say click text or verify text something, it basically looks at the screen, which is shown on the right side of the screenshot, and identifies that and interact as in exactly in the similar way as a manual tester would interact with these application under tests. But that's the power of passwords there. And you can have, as I said earlier, it's a very highly scalable platform. You can have multiple robots doing the same thing with different user access rights, and test the application in and out with that. Now, something that people often wonder about is that, hey, is there something behind these passwords? What am I looking at? Is it like some kind of simplification of a test case? So to explain that a bit more, there's, from a user's point of view, there is nothing behind these passwords test cases, and these are, in this process, it's created by creator, but behind them is nothing that the end user has to interact with. Of course, when these are actually executed by the robot, there's a whole bunch of layers of technologies that it uses to interact with the screen on the right, or application under test on the right side. And if you're familiar with Salesforce application, it's slightly infamous for having this kind of dynamic IDs, embedded iframes, and then shadow elements in the DOM. And every time there's an update, the test cases break. There's a whole stream of discipline which talks about self-healing test cases and whatnot. And these things we have already taken care of in that script. And if I were to explain slightly more on how it works, is it basically interacts with a bunch of technologies, and it has a fallback pattern on that. When something is not recognized, it falls back on that different technology to interact with the application or test. So it might try to figure out, is there a sales in the screen, and if it can't find it through driver mechanism, it will fall back to taking the picture of the screen and identifying it using the computer vision technologies. So it actually tries with multiple technologies to figure out and test the application under test, which makes it really, really robust. And not only that, if you have Salesforce application, you are pretty familiar that you will have 100 OK buttons in a page, and you will have 100 something similar in that page. So what matters there is, how do you actually find that exact OK button or exact sales button that you're looking at? And there's this concept of anchoring in page, that you can anchor something which is the closest to the element that you are trying to interact with. But yeah, this is how the test cases look like. They're highly robust and with very, very low maintenance, because we have been doing these studies with our biggest customers on how are the maintenance efforts. And if I were to throw you an example, which we did with under an EU project, the biggest project is running around 18,000 test cases every day, and the maintenance effort that they have tracked in 2.5 years was under 15%, as against what we were earlier seeing in the slides, that the maintenance was around 60%. So that's the power and beauty of this Qentinel Page product. But if you go further on the screen, and since it's the SaaS product, and now, as I also mentioned, that we are available on App Exchange, so this particular screenshot is from within Salesforce environment. So I've launched Qentinel Page from within Salesforce. You can also launch it outside of Salesforce. And I was talking about robots. You have them on the left side of the screen. You can just click and scale them. You can have as many robots as you want and run things. Then there are detailed reports, execution history. You have videos of those things. You can schedule runs, stream those runs. You can do a whole lot of things when it comes to execution of test cases in Qentinel Page. So if I were to talk about this integrated strength, now if you think from a technology stack point of view, as Mark has been talking about, the whole idea of designing test cases and then optimization of what needs to be run, that part is taken care very beautifully by Conformiq. And then once those test cases get to us, we ensure through the technology of how those test cases are transcribed, that they are highly robust, they are cross-platform, and you can run them in a hyper scalable way, as I mentioned, with hundreds of thousands of robots or as many as you want. And then you have the result database for you forever and analytics on top of that. But that's just technology. That's just like the beauty of what technology can enable you. But eventually what you're aiming at, what you're trying to get, what is the value of that, the whole approach, is the better quality of your software. And you are able to implement those end-to-end crucial processes. First of all, you're able to ensure that they are running well, whatever you have in the process. And if you are to enable new processes, you can accelerate your release cycles. We'll look at in the customer success stories how our customers have done, but you can accelerate your release cycles because now you have a machine, an optimized machine to ensure your quality of whatever you're gonna implement in the new processes. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, I'll kind of accelerate things here a little bit because we're running short of time. But yeah, if you look at what's outlined here, the bottom line is Conformiq is built to adjust and grow and deal with new processes and new approaches because it's flexible to do that. It's smart, it's intelligent, and frankly, it's getting smarter, particularly in cooperation with Qentinel Pace. And from a requirement standpoint, which is particularly key, now that I'll talk about it in our customer success story, is documentation, the ability to understand what you're testing and how it ties back to your requirements. Have you addressed those? Do you have the documentation? Can you meet the compliance requirements? And the answer is yes. We provide that insight into the testing process, and of course you have to get to market faster, test shorter, save money. The combination of the two allows you to do that. So now let's just talk about a couple of examples, and I'll start with one from the Conformiq side, and this is one of our customers, which is a large bank in Canada, and if you look at going back to the original problems and discussion of those challenges, the complexity of the applications integrated across a significant platform, and particularly in a bank, and Conformiq is primarily used by banks, financial institutions, life science companies, insurance companies, where you have a compliance challenge. You have to be able to demonstrate to regulatory and or customers that you're being efficient and complete in your testing process, and we provide the ability to do that. And these are challenges that banks have across the board, and of course they got to do it inexpensively and be efficient in their environment. In our particular situation here, where this was the development of a new customer-facing application with customer data, they were really not in a position to add a whole bunch of new personnel. So they have to be able to achieve these testing objectives with people that are either new to the application or new to testing. So it's a real challenge if you're not figuring out how to automate the process. So if you look at the results that they've achieved, it's really fascinating to me, and actually expanding within the bank, because they've been able to validate that they're meeting their testing objectives with new people. In the first couple of months, they've actually been able to automate the creation of tens of thousands of test cases, which are critical to validate this new application with a very small group of people that had never been involved in manual test case writing. So by automating that process, they can very much accelerate the release process of their new platform that they're building. And then they document it. They found a number of bugs, and then in cooperation with the test execution, they can make that cycle of the SDLC cycle even shorter than they've been able to do in the past. It's really worked brilliantly for them, and I imagine it can work that way for you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nikhil to talk about another success story in Europe or Nordic.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So yeah, we have this very large Nordic teleoperator. They are one of the largest Salesforce implementation in the Nordics with the millions of contacts. And their challenge was that they were to, as I was mentioning before, enable new business processes, new business critical processes for internal customers as well as for external customers. So it was related to the web shop building on Salesforce platform. And now the challenge what they had, they wanted to support both classic and lightning interfaces. They also had a release management platform, one of like the most famous release management platforms in Salesforce ecosystem. But due to the insupportive metadata of the Salesforce implementation, few processes need to be done manually. And there was before every release, of course, they had to do a lot of manual testing. And because in order to do that manual testing, which was very time consuming, they had to do a 6 to 12 hours of downtime before every release. Now, if you think about 6 to 12 hours of downtime for a web store, that's a significant amount of losses when you think about dollars. And then they tried with a bunch of tools. They started with Selenium, also a couple of other products that they tried on. And they realized that the maintenance was actually eating on their investments, what they were doing in building those test cases. So either the products were not able to interact with the applications, or if they were able to, at the worst, they're really unresponsive and flaky test cases. Plus the challenge that I was mentioning earlier, different user profiles. So you have a lot of different environments in Salesforce. How do you efficiently manage all these Salesforce environments from a test automation point of view? Mark, could you please change the slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did they achieve with Qentinel Pace? Well, it was 3 times faster and 20 times more robust than Selenium, for example. As I mentioned earlier, we have these fallback strategies, anchoring methodologies, and all that, which makes the test cases very, very robust, and also the identification is very strong. Now, and talking about test environments, they scaled these robots that I was talking about, and each robot with an identity of its own was addressing the different Salesforce user profiles which they were testing. And yeah, and they also automated the manual tasks, which I was referring to in their release management platform. What that basically meant is taking the Salesforce application from one environment and deploying it into another. It was more of like an RPA kind of task. What they did achieve with all of that test automation they built on Qentinel Pace is they reduced that 6 to 12 hours of downtime to 0 hours. That's a significant amount of saving. As I will emphasize it again, think about a web store down for 6 to 12 hours. And I personally spoke to one of their implementation person, and he said, we are saving for every 2 weeks of work, we are saving 1 week. And that's a great savings on the work. Now, earlier, their testing constituted of like 40% of manual efforts. Now they were using that time to actually increasing the test coverage. And I mean, all in all, if you think about it, cost savings, enhanced quality, and also internally faster Salesforce adoption, because you are able to enable your internal customers, your employees, to through those business critical processes which they require for their day-to-day work. So that worked out really great for this large Nordic teleoperator. So I'm pretty sure it will work out great for you too.
So that brings us to the time, for questions, and if you liked what you hear, you want to see it in actual operation, please reach out to us to get a demo and potentially start a proof of concept for your environment. But as you can see, there's significant value on the execution side and the planning side, and together the optimized, the integrated solution can deliver significantly more. So with that, we'll see. Are there any questions that we can address from the audience?
There are a couple of few questions, Mark and Nikhil. The first one is, do you support other tools, and how scalable is your solution?
Is that for me, or is that for Mark?
When you talk about other tools, I guess I can elaborate because it's not really interactive. But what you look at the SDLC. Obviously, you've got execution and you've got planning, but you've also got test management, so requirements management, and so on, and both the combined solution with Conformiq and or each tool independently actually integrates with the other tools. So I guess the answer is yes. And if you want to complement that, Nikhil, please do.
Yeah. So if you think from the this execution side of the equation, then we do support a lot of other technologies. So it's you can basically build in. Well, there are open APIs for a lot of things. Plus, we recently launched a collaboration where we are testing AutoSAR, for example. So in short, yes, that's possible, and we do it.
Okay, great. Next question, Nikhil, is for you. How robust are your passwords?
Very robust. Short answer. As I mentioned, if you think about the challenges especially from Salesforce point of view, the biggest challenges in interacting with the application comes from first of all repetitive similar elements. Like you might have, as I said, 100 different OKs on one screen. Another comes from this kind of shadow elements which don't load until you scroll to them, and dynamic IDs and whatnot. So what I'm trying to say is you can't rely on one technology to interact with those elements. And the more the application or test becomes visual and this kind of complicated, the more important it becomes to have multiple technologies to fall back on. Because essentially, if your test cases are flaky, if they can't interact with the system under test, it's not a problem of your system under test. It's a problem of your test case, which means you need to have a myriad of technologies that you can rely on.
Okay. We have another question. Do you support self-healing test cases or steps?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. There's a whole academic discussion going on. A few companies talking about self-healing test cases when they talk about like if something changes in your screen, looking at their execution basically relies on different strategies on how to look at the elements. But there is a fine line which don't want to cross when it comes to self-healing test cases. How self-healing test cases are talked about is, well, you do whatever on your application and your test cases won't break. But I want to remind you there that the whole idea of test cases is that the value comes from when a test case actually fails, not when all the test cases pass. And that's somewhere where people get it wrong. Oh, we have the self-healing test cases which never fail. Well, you might as well not have testing in first place. So what we have when it comes to self-healing test cases is the whole falling back mechanism on different technologies. That's for one. And the second is to even in one technology, you have different search strategies for identifying an element. But it does mean that, hey, if you have changed your application under test, your test case will break, and there is no miracle that's going to save it. And that's the purpose of test case, to fail when something is wrong.
Okay, so that's about it. We have few questions, and I think that brings us to the end of the session. There are no further questions now. In case anybody has further questions, you have our email IDs. Feel free to reach out to us. I would like to thank our speakers, Mark and Nikhil, for sharing their knowledge with us, and our audience for patiently sitting and listening through the entire session. So thank you so much. It was a great session, and we will just conclude the session now. And
it will be available.
It
will be available. The recording will be available for those who might want to take advantage of it.
Yes, we will contact you through emails and share the recording with you.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Hey,
all right.
thanks everybody.